This case introduces a complex and high-stakes legal dispute that sits at the intersection of social media influence, consent, and civil liability. If the allegations outlined in the lawsuit are ultimately proven in court, the consequences could be significant, not only for the individual defendant, but also for how similar cases involving influencers are evaluated in the future. However, it is essential to approach this situation through a legal lens. At this stage, these are allegations presented in a civil complaint, and they remain unproven until tested through the judicial process. The lawsuit has been filed against a widely known social media figure who operates under the name Clavicular, whose real name is Braden Peters. The plaintiff, Alexandra Vasilievna Mendoza, alleges that a series of interactions between her and the defendant led to physical, emotional, and financial harm. According to the complaint, some of these events occurred when she was a minor, which introduces an additional layer of legal complexity. In civil law, particularly in cases involving minors, courts often scrutinize issues of consent, influence, and authority more carefully, as minors are generally considered legally incapable of providing full-informed consent in certain contexts. The complaint begins by establishing background context, describing the plaintiff as someone who turned to social media at a young age to support herself financially. This detail is not incidental. It plays a role in shaping the legal narrative. By presenting herself as financially vulnerable and reliant on online opportunities, the plaintiff may be attempting to establish that she was in a position where she could be influenced or pressured by someone with a larger platform and more resources. From a legal standpoint, this could support arguments related to reliance or imbalance of power, both of which can be relevant in civil claims such as fraud or emotional distress. According to the allegations, the plaintiff and defendant initially connected through social media, with the defendant allegedly offering financial compensation for participation in content creation. This type of arrangement is not uncommon in influencer culture, where collaborations and sponsorships often involve informal agreements. However, when one party is a minor, the legal implications become more significant. Contracts involving minors are often voidable, and any arrangement that involves compensation or performance may be subject to additional scrutiny, particularly if parental consent is not obtained. The complaint further alleges that the plaintiff later traveled to meet the defendant in person, where certain interactions occurred that she claims were non-consensual. While these allegations are described in detail within the narrative portion of the complaint, they are notably not listed as independent legal claims within the lawsuit. This raises important legal questions about litigation strategy. In many jurisdictions, courts may strike or exclude allegations that are not directly tied to the causes of action being pursued. However, plaintiffs sometimes include such details to provide context or to shape how the case is perceived, particularly if they believe it demonstrates a broader pattern of conduct. The central focus of the lawsuit, however, is an alleged incident involving an injection that was reportedly conducted during a live-streamed session. According to the complaint, the defendant administered a substance described as Aqualix, which is characterized as a fat-dissolving product that is not approved by regulatory authorities for such use. The plaintiff alleges that the defendant was not a licensed medical professional, did not disclose his lack of qualifications, and did not obtain legally valid consent prior to performing the procedure. These claims form the basis of several legal causes of action. The first major claim is battery. In civil law, battery does not necessarily involve violence in the traditional sense. Rather, it refers to intentional and unauthorized physical contact that is harmful or offensive. If the plaintiff can demonstrate that the defendant intentionally performed the injection without valid consent and that this action resulted in harm, this claim could be legally viable. However, the defense may argue that consent was given or that the interaction was misunderstood, which would shift the analysis toward whether that consent was legally valid, especially given the plaintiff's alleged age at the time. The second claim is fraud. Fraud requires the plaintiff to prove that the defendant made a false representation of a material fact, knew that the representation was false, intended for the plaintiff to rely on it, and that the plaintiff did in fact rely on it to her detriment. In this case, the plaintiff alleges that the defendant misrepresented himself as having the authority or qualifications to perform the injection. If these elements are proven, the claim could be significant. However, fraud claims often face challenges in court, as they require clear evidence of intentional deception. not merely misunderstanding or omission. The third claim is intentional infliction of emotional distress, which is one of the more difficult claims to prove in civil litigation. This cause of action requires conduct that is so extreme and outrageous that it exceeds all bounds of decency accepted in society. The plaintiff alleges that the defendant's actions caused severe emotional harm, including trauma, distress, and humiliation. Courts typically require substantial evidence to support such claims, including medical or psychological evaluations, and may dismiss them if the conduct does not meet the high legal threshold. The fourth claim involves the unauthorized use of name and likeness. This arises from the allegation that the incident was live-streamed and monetized without the plaintiff's valid consent. Under Florida law, individuals have the right to control how their identity is used for commercial purposes. If the plaintiff was a minor at the time, the issue of consent becomes even more significant, as minors generally cannot legally authorize the commercial use of their likeness without parental involvement. This claim could potentially allow the plaintiff to recover profits generated from the content, as well as additional damages. From the defense perspective, the defendant has denied the allegations and indicated that he intends to contest them through the legal process. In civil cases, the burden of proof lies with the plaintiff, who must establish her claims by a preponderance of the evidence. This means that she must show that it is more likely than not that the alleged events occurred as described. The defense may challenge the credibility of the plaintiff, question the accuracy of the allegations, and present alternative interpretations of the evidence. One particularly important element in this case is the existence of alleged video evidence. If a recording of the incident exists and is authenticated, it could serve as a central piece of evidence. However, video evidence is not always conclusive. It must be interpreted within its full context, and both sides may present expert testimony to explain what the footage does or does not show. Issues such as editing, framing, and the circumstances under which the video was recorded can all influence how it is evaluated in court. Another layer of complexity arises from the potential overlap between civil and criminal law. Some of the allegations described in the complaint, if proven, could also constitute criminal offenses. In such situations, it is not uncommon for civil proceedings to be delayed if a criminal investigation is ongoing, as defendants have constitutional rights that may be affected by parallel litigation. At this stage, it is not publicly clear whether criminal proceedings have been initiated, but it remains a possibility depending on how authorities assess the claims. The question of damages is also central to this case. The plaintiff is seeking compensatory damages, which are intended to cover actual losses, as well as the possibility of punitive damages, which are designed to punish particularly egregious conduct. Additionally, the claim involving unauthorized use of likeness may allow for recovery of profits earned from the alleged content. The calculation of damages in cases like this can be complex, often involving expert testimony and detailed financial analysis. There are also broader implications to consider. Cases involving social media influencers often raise questions about accountability, platform responsibility, and the boundaries of online conduct. While the current lawsuit is focused on an individual defendant, it is possible that future legal action could involve additional parties, such as platforms or business entities, depending on how the case develops. However, at this stage, such considerations remain speculative. Ultimately, the outcome of this case will depend on the evidence presented, the credibility of the parties involved, and the application of legal standards. While the allegations are serious and have generated significant attention, the legal process requires a careful and methodical evaluation of all claims. Courts do not decide cases based on public opinion or speculation. They rely on admissible evidence and established legal principles. As this case moves forward, it will likely continue to evolve, with new information emerging through filings, hearings, and potential discovery. For now, it remains an active legal dispute, and any conclusions about liability or wrongdoing must await the outcome of the judicial process. What is clear, however, is that this case highlights the growing intersection between digital influence and legal responsibility, and it may serve as an important reference point for similar cases in the future. If you found this breakdown helpful and want more clear, fact-based legal analysis on trending cases, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future updates.